All right, welcome to the second part of podcast 44. Um, Last time we focused on what plants are, who they are related to, and meaning the green algae in the Protista kingdom, or at least currently in the Protista kingdom, and the important transition from water to land terrestrial life and the problems that had to be solved to get there. Now what we're going to do is look at the plant groups that solve those problems. They weren't all solved at the same time. They were solved in steps by different plant groups, one building on the previous one. We mentioned last time that their kingdom Plantae, or Plantae if you prefer, is one large kingdom in which all the groups are photosynthetic autotrophs, and eukaryotic and all those things. There are two major groups, vascular and non-vascular plants. The non-vascular is the most primitive. That lacks plumbing, tubes to efficiently carry food and water up and down a large body, which means that the non-vascular plants rely on osmosis and diffusion to get material through. If you'll remember, osmosis and diffusion are movements of substances from areas of high concentration to low concentration. It is a cellular process. It is from one cell to the next, and it's inefficient, comparatively speaking, and slow. If you are a large plant, osmosis and diffusion are not going to do it for you. You need plumbing. Vascular plants are the ones that got the plumbing and are by far and away the dominant plant groups today. And so what we're going to do is look at non-vascular plants and then the three major groups of vascular plants that arose in the history of life on Earth, and talk about what each of them brought to the table that kind of helped plant evolution on its way. I think we saw this slide in the last podcast. So two major groups, vascular and non-vascular. Yeah, we did this. Okay. Now, the vascular plants are grouped into three categories, again, evolutionarily related to each other. The first to arise were the seedless vascular plants. We're going to talk about them. Then the gymnosperms from the seedless vascular plants, and then the angiosperms, which are the most dominant group today. So that's where we're headed, but let's back up. Let's start at the beginning of plant evolution. The first period of plant evolution from the green algae is the mosses, the bryophytes. Division Bryophyta has currently got 10,000 species today, which is not too shabby, really. But compared to the rest of the plants, it's very few. There are three divisions. The mosses are the most dominant. There's a little group called liverworts, there's a little group called hornworts, but the mosses are the most dominant. So, in understanding plants, we pay a lot of attention to their reproductive or life cycles. Okay, plant life cycles are called alternation of generations. Let me get my pen in place here. Sorry, you'd think by now I'd do this ahead of time. Alternation of generations. Actually, okay, and essentially what this means is there are, in most plants, though it is most obvious in the mosses, the bryophytes, the life cycle alternates between two different plant body forms, okay? With each form having a role in producing the other form. And we don't really see that in animals. So we need to understand this. One body form is haploid. In other words, has all its cells have just one set of chromosomes. The other body form is diploid. It has two sets, just like you do in each of your cells. This is kind of odd for us to think about. We are a diploid body form. All of our cells have two sets of chromosomes. We cut the chromosome number in half to create gametes. Well, in this case, there is a whole body form that is haploid that is part of this life cycle. Now, so this is an important thing to understand here. The haploid form in plants is a multicellular body. It's not merely a gamete, though they do have haploid gametes as well. But this is considerably different from what we're used to with animals. Okay. Now, why do we care about this? Because the differences in the life cycles that we will see as we go from mosses to the ferns to the pines to the flowering plants give us real clues about the evolutionary advances that are made by the plant groups. It is not trivia, okay? It seems like trivia. I will be the first to say that the memorization of these cycles seems really unnecessary, but spend less time memorizing the steps than getting the idea of this haploid to diploid to haploid life cycle and how it's different in each group. So let's look at the mosses. Remember, this right here that we are looking at, these are the bryophytes, the mosses, the first group to arise on land from the water, our closest living relatives to the green algae ancestor. Okay, now if you went out today and looked at a moss, I should have gone and gotten some moss. Now it's pitch dark outside and I can't do that. We'll bring some into class. But if you went out and picked up some moss in your hand, you'd have this little clump of plants. There would be some little boy moss and some little girl moss, little green, about maybe a centimeter, maybe 2 centimeters tall. And we're looking here on the screen a male moss plant and a female moss plant. Now, what you need to notice are, we need some vocabulary here. They are both haploid, meaning that if you took some cells from either of these little green plants, you would see that they each have only one set of chromosomes. They are haploid individuals. Okay? Now, this little boy plant, he's the male gametophyte. Phyte means plant. Gamete means that's what he makes. This little plant is going to make sperm. This is the female gametophyte. She is going to produce eggs. And you can see, now these are highly magnified. If you saw these little plants, you wouldn't be able to see, you can't look at them and say, oh, that's a little boy, that's a little girl. Okay? You would not be able to see these. You would have to magnify these, but I've drawn them in big on this little diagram. So this male gametophyte would produce sperm, and he does so by mitosis. Wait. Don't we always produce sperm by way of meiosis? Well, guess what? This guy is already haploid. He doesn't have to cut his chromosome number in half. It's already been cut in half. And so he just, by mitosis, produces a bunch of sperm. And sperm must swim to egg. Now, hold it. What is the problem here? These plants still require what? H2O, water, for reproduction. So they are not terribly advanced. Now it may be water in the form of dewdrops or raindrops or whatever, mist from a nearby little splashing waterfall, but they must have water because the sperm still swim. There is no pollen here. Okay? Now I've taken this structure here and I have made it bigger so we can see. This is the this structure is actually this female vase-like structure that contains the egg is called an archegonium. If any jerk on an AP archegonia or is singular, this is the female reproductive structure, okay, where the egg is found. Think of it as an ovary, but it's not called an ovary, okay? Now, fertilization is going to happen. Mr. Sperm is going to meet Ms. Egg, and there they go. And what we are going to create is a zygote, and that's haploid plus haploid is going to give us a diploid cell. So here's where the diploid structure. Now this, just like a baby created from fertilization, this right here is going to begin to divide by mitosis. Okay, it's going to grow, and it is going to emerge from the female reproductive structure as a large visible body form that you can see. Remember, this is an alternation of two body forms, alternation of generations. These gametophytes are the first body form. This that was created right here by fertilization is the second. It is called a sporophyte. Note, it is not called a gametophyte. That's because it doesn't make gametes. Guess what it makes? It makes spores. Okay? It grows out of the female gametophyte. It is completely diploid because it was made from this diploid zygote that formed there. Okay? Now, what you should notice before we go on is that this guy is not green. These guys were green. They could do photosynthesis. This guy cannot. He is completely dependent on the female. He is growing up out of her right here, and he's never going to leave. He's the kid that will not leave home. He grows and he is completely dependent on nourishment that she provides. He is a dependent creature, okay? Dependent completely on the mother. Now, inside, he has a little capsule up here, a little hollow capsule in which a certain type of cell division is going to occur in the cells there. Meiosis is going to occur. That means his diploid cells are going to get cut in half. Their chromosome number is going to get cut in half. And when they do, the chromosome numbers get cut in half in these cells, spores right here are produced. And when this guy is mature, he kind of dries up, and the little cap that's on top of his capsule gets real taut, and it really, ping, it springs open, and out come, catapulted, are spores that will fly off where the wind takes them, or they may land very nearby, whatever. But the spore capsule will open and release these haploid spores that were created by meiosis inside of this capsule. So now this diploid structure has created haploid cells. These are spores. Now, the spores, if we're lucky, as I mentioned, will land somewhere. Maybe the wind blows them, maybe they're drop where they are placed, wherever. But they land somewhere that is hopefully suitable for growth. And if they do, then they will grow, they will germinate. Remember what that word means, to grow. They will sprout and become either, maybe this is a little boy spore and this is a little girl spore, and they will grow into either a male or female gametophyte. Notice these are haploid structures. Why are they haploid? Because meiosis occurred in there and created haploid spores, and so the cycle begins again. So we are going to alternate between these guys and this guy, back and forth, over and over and over again. Try to keep that idea in mind. We're going to see how it's modified with advances in plants that occur later on. Now, the adaptations that moss, bryophytes, and these other early plants were able to make that move them onto land are basically they found a way to keep their tissues from completely desiccating, from drying out, and that was to have a waxy cuticle. They also were able to protect their gametes, at least while they were forming, by having them form inside a protective reproductive structure that, remember, we call a gametangia, or gametangium is singular. So here is a gametangium that is protecting the sperm at least while they're forming, and here's the female gametangium that is going to protect the egg and actually protect the zygote that is growing. So this is important. The cuticle, and we've got protected gametes and embryos, at least during their formation. But remember, there are things that have not been adapted, things that have not made the transformation yet. They are still tied to water because they still have swimming sperm. This is huge. Still have swimming sperm. They do not have vascular tissue, so their size is very limited. You do not see big moss plants. You see itty-bitty moss plants, and that is directly because they must rely on osmosis and diffusion. They cannot attain large size. They have no seeds. They do have spores. Now, spores are not as good as seeds, but they are better than a little naked embryo just being thrown to the winds. They do have a protective coating that does offer some basic protection to the little creature that is inside, the single-celled creature, so I mean tiny, inside. But seeds are infinitely better, and we don't have those yet. We will, but not in this plant group. And something else that is different in this group, the gametophyte, the haploid plant body form, is the dominant generation. Okay, the only place you see the diploid is in that zygote and the sporophyte generation. I should have fixed this slide. And the sporophyte generation. Okay, all right. Here's some pictures of moss. These here are what the gametophytes look like, and different moss look different, but generally speaking, they're a little green with leafy-like structures. These here are the sporophytes that are emerging from the females that are all down here, and here you can see the spore capsule at the end. This is like one of these magnified, and you can see how the cap opens up and the little spores would all come out. Okay? This picture is a microscope of a dissected gametangium. I presume this is female, but honestly I'm not 100% sure. All right, now, so we've got the moss surviving on land, but still highly dependent on there being water nearby in some fashion. Now, our second period of plant evolution is when some ancient moss-like critter got another adaptation. Okay, and this group that we're going to talk about is known as the seedless vascular plants. So what adaptation did this plant get? It didn't get seeds, because note, we're still seedless, so that means this guy's still making spores, but he's got vascular tissue, which means now we're going to get to see some size. All right. So the adaptations that are made in this group from the previous group, the non-vascular plants, okay, we've still got the cuticle and those gametangia, so that's still carrying over from that first group. But new to them, we're going to see for the first time the sporophyte is now going to be dominant, the more visible partner in this group. The sporophyte is the dominant generation, and of course, obviously from its name, we're going to have vascular tissue present. Huge deal, that. Okay, so we can efficiently move water and food. We can attain a larger size, but still we're going to depend on swimming sperm and still lack seeds. Spores are going to be the best they can do as far as getting their embryos out and about. Okay, so let's look at, I think I've got, all right, yeah, let me do this before, well, no, let me do this slide, sorry. All right, there are 4 living groups left from this period of plant evolution. The most important group by far in terms of sheer numbers is the Pterophyta, the ferns. There are the little xylophytes, whisk ferns. I think that's probably this picture. The lycophytes, actually I don't know which picture. I get these all confused. Don't worry about these. The ferns are the classic example. There's 12,000 species. They're much better represented than either of these others. Okay, so let's look at this fern life cycle. Okay. What we see here is an adult fern. This is a frond. Okay, the leafy part that we can see this thing that looks like a stem, which actually attaches to another stem. Ferns have something that we probably ought to mention here because sometimes it pops up on the AP exam. If this is a fern frond, like that, okay, and we see this thing that looks like a stem, it's really not. Here's another fern frond here. All right, the stem is actually, here's the soil, and these are poking up through the soil. This is the stem. It is an underground stem, and it is called a rhizome, okay? A rhizome. Now, see if you can get this straight, because I'm going to give you another word that's going to go back to the mosses. Remember, the mosses do not have no true leaves, stems, or roots. They have structures that look like roots that go underground, but they're not true roots because why? They don't have vascular tissue. The name for these root-like structures is rhizoid. Now, I gotta tell you, actually I think it's spelled with a Y. I'll have to look this up. But rhizoid and rhizome are two words that look really similar, but they might test you on a vocab in a kind of way on this. So these are not true roots, they are root-like. These are underground stems found in ferns. They're found in other things too, but the classic place we talk about them is with ferns. And here you can see the rhizome right there. They've pulled it up out of the ground or found it growing on a rotting log or something, but that's the rhizome, and you can see leaves coming off of it. Now, if you look underneath a leaf on one of these fronds, look underneath the leaflets, you will often find little structures like these, okay? These are called sporangia, okay? They are little capsules producing spores, much like we saw with the moss. That means if this leaf is producing spores, then this must be the sporophyte generation, and he is a diploid creature. He is diploid, okay? That means these capsules here, each of them is undergoing meiosis, and the chromosome number is being cut in half of the cells that are inside those little sporangia. And this is one of these right here. This is it close up under a microscope, and you can see it's opened, and coming out of there are spores. These are haploid cells. So this is the diploid sporophyte. These are the cells which undergo the containers of cells that undergo meiosis. These are the cells produced by meiosis, and these are called spores. They are released from the sporangium, which is what these things all are. So, diploid sporophyte creates spores by doing meiosis. Now look what's happening. If the spore lands somewhere, it begins to grow, okay? And when it grows, if it's landed in a place that is good for growth, it will become a very tiny structure. This is something you would never notice if you were out in the woods. It becomes a very tiny structure that is the fern gametophyte, meaning this is going to create gametes. This is the plant, the body form that is going to create gametes. So let's go back. We're going to alternate from this highly visible sporophyte to this body form that is the very much less visible gametophyte. It is haploid. Why is it haploid? Because it came from this, which was a spore, which is a haploid cell. Why is it haploid? Because what happened inside the sporangium was meiosis, and that creates haploid cells from this diploid structure. So, this gametophyte is haploid. It's got male and female reproductive parts on it. I'm not sure exactly where they are, but it's got tiny little male and female parts. They don't mature at the same time, otherwise we'd just be doing asexual reproduction. And I think you're seeing either the male or the female parts here, but they produce sperm and egg, fertilization happens, and then we get the sporophytes growing out of the very small gametophytes, and you can see the sporophyte gets very, very, very large. This is a simpler diagram, so let's kind of look at it. First of all, here are your fern. Whoa, can't use white on white. Sorry. Let's do that. All right. These are your fronds. This right here is the rhizome. Okay, an underground stem. These are the actual roots, and they are true roots here. Okay. Now this is the sporophyte, which means it is diploid. Okay. It has spore cases or a sporangium, and meiosis happens inside of that, and out pop these spores. These are haploid, and if you'll notice, what they're going to do is anything that is actually diploid is brown. So brown equals diploid, and blue equals haploid, and so they are trying to show you clearly with color here. So the spore lands somewhere, begins to grow, and it grows into a gametophyte, and what we see are Antheridium, Archegonium. This is male, this is female reproductive structures. The Antheridium produces sperm, and again, these are swimming. They must swim, so again, we have to be near some type of water. They will swim to a female Archegonium. The zygote is made. That zygote is diploid, as haploid sperm meets haploid egg. It grows, the zygote grows by mitosis out of the gametophyte, and boom, we see the sporophyte that is going to become the large, big, dominant plant body form. So, gametophyte, sporophyte, makes spores, makes gametes. Okay? If you don't get that, please see me. You need to get that. Now, the third important period of plant evolution. Okay, so we got, from the first period, we got the mosses with their cuticle and their spores, but they're still dependent on water, really tiny. The second period, we got the ferns and their brethren, and we got the vascular tissue added to all of that, so we can get really big. And now the sporophyte is the more dominant, more visible, and not dependent. So the third period, we get what is called the gymnosperms, or the naked seed plants. Now, what we're going to get added here, obviously, are seeds. We're going to improve upon the spores as a method of dispersing our babies, our embryos, throughout the world. Remember, we have to disperse two things if we're plants. We have to disperse sex cells, primarily pollen, and we also have to disperse babies, because we don't want the babies just laying at our feet, because then we're competing with our offspring. So it's much better if we can get them dispersed over a wide range. So we disperse pollen and we disperse babies. We disperse pollen by wind, by pollinators. We disperse babies in seeds. Okay? So the adaptations that the gymnosperms or naked seed plants have, they still have the cuticle, they have the gametangia. Please notice we're retaining all the advances and then we're adding to it. Dominant sporophyte, vascular tissue, but they are going to add seeds to even further protect the embryos from drying out, and giving them nutrition and aiding them in dispersing. We are also going to add pollen, air-transported sperm, that has been driving me bananas this past week. I don't know about you. But we are going to get rid of the water. We do not need water. This is huge for this group. No more water for reproduction. Okay, we are finally going to be able to get away from the edges of the streams and stuff like that. Okay, But they are still primitive in that they do not have flowers and they do not have fruit. And this is going to come in our last group of plants. Okay? So, naked seeds is referring to the seeds not being enclosed in any protective chambers, what we would recognize as fruit. They are produced exposed within for example, the scales of a pine cone, for example. They are not encased in fruit. This is actually a seed from a pine. Those cones, those pine cones, that if you step on them, they hurt. They begin as closed structures, but when the seeds are mature, the scales pop open, which is usually how we find them. And the seeds that you see in this photo with the little wing get blown by the wind out of those pine cones. And those little things, they act just like the little helicopters that you might have seen on maple trees and so on, but they propel the seed some distance away from the parent plant. Okay? A seed consists, remember what a spore consisted of. A spore equals one cell, and it's haploid. Okay, that's it, and a protective coat. Not a whole lot going for you. You need to land somewhere good, or you ain't gonna last long. A seed consists of an embryo, and what that implies is a multicellular structure that is already developed to some degree when it was still contained within its parent. Okay, that's getting us off to a head start here. Stored food, we're going to have some starch packed away in that seed so the baby can live during that time before it can actually do photosynthesis on its own, and a protective covering called a seed coat. This is so far and away better than a spore for sending your babies off into the wild. Okay. The other advance is pollen, airborne sperm. Now understand there is more to pollen than being just sperm. It's actually a little case with usually some little winged-like structures on it so that it will be propelled better through the air, and the sperm are contained in that little tiny case. But it is notice it contains sperm. Pollen is a highly reduced in size male gametophyte. It is normally like a 3-celled structure, 1 cell for the pollen casing and 2 sperm cells inside of it, actually. But the point of the pollen is that it is no longer dependent on water for fertilization. But a trend I want you to see is what's been happening to the gametophytes. In the moss, the gametophyte was dominant. It was the feature you see. The little moss plants are all gametophytes. But in the fern, it got reduced. And in these plants, in the gymnosperms, the gametophyte is reduced to a tiny, tiny dust speck. Okay? The gametophyte is getting smaller. The sporophyte is getting increasingly dominant. Okay? And we are, again, this is the biggie, not dependent on water for fertilization anymore. All right? The most important group of the gymnosperms are the conifers, the cone-bearing plants with the needle-like leaves, all the evergreens, the pines, the spruce, the fir, things like that. There's 550 species, so not even as many species of these as there are of moss, but they're a huge part. I mean, you look anywhere, you'll find pine trees. They're very, very, very successful. Okay, and there are others. I think ginkgos were actually referenced on that horrible AP mock exam, which is an actual AP exam. It's a very ancient group of gymnosperms, and there's only one species alive. Why they felt compelled to make that question beats me. But anyway, now the 4th period of plant evolution, okay, is led to the flowering plants that are our dominant form today, and these are the angiosperms. You should be able to recognize that name as belonging to the flowering plants. Okay, they have many adaptations, many of these that came from the previous groups, and then they add on to them. The cuticle, the gametangia, the dominant sporophyte, the vascular tissue, seeds, and pollen. All of that was present because of the evolution of the other groups of plants. What they did is they added on to that flowers and fruits. Apparently two hugely wonderful things, because these are now our very dominant plant forms. They also added another thing called double fertilization, and you should at least have some understanding of that. First of all, that it's only found in these flowering plants. But a pollen grain contains a couple of sperm, and they are both going to be used to fertilize something. One of them will fertilize the egg to make an embryo, okay? But the other one is going to fertilize something called two polar nuclei. Let me see if I can draw this. Let me give you a better, clearer color, okay? Let's say that, all right, I am in the pistil, the female flower part, and here is an chamber called an ovule, where an egg develops. There are several ovules in most plants, and there would be an egg inside each one. Now I'm going to take that and I'm going to blow it up. So here it is, and what you would see is at one end there is a cell that is the egg, and it's accompanied by actually a couple other cells down here. At this, I think it's actually in the middle of the female, this is actually the female gametophyte hidden away. Again, remember, it's getting reduced, hidden away in the pistil. There are two cells called polar nuclei. So when Mr. Sperm Mr. Pollen Grain, lands here, he grows a pollen tube down here, and then two sperm swim down the pollen tube, down, and then, let's say this is the pollen tube now connecting to the ovule. One sperm comes in and fertilizes that egg. Let me change my ink color just because I can. Alright, so sperm comes in, fertilizes that egg. The other sperm comes in and fertilizes the polar nuclei. So what we have here is now we've got a diploid embryo, but we have something else. We have a triploid set of tissues here. They are going to divide and make endosperm, which is basically food. It is a starch food supply. Okay? Why do this? Well, it is thought that the double fertilization is a way of ensuring that we don't start making food unless fertilization has really taken place. We don't start storing food in that seed unless we have actually certain that we've had fertilization take place. So this double fertilization system is kind of, I guess, a double check off. At least that's what I've heard. So let me get rid of this. Oops, my bad. Erase it. So you should understand triploid tissue is that endosperm or stored food supply. Okay, two polar nuclei plus one sperm nucleus equals 3N, not 2N diploid, but 3N. Okay. You should know your basic flower anatomy. You should know the anther is where sperm are produced. The filament, that the whole thing is called a stamen here. This is they call it a carpel, which is fine. It's also called a pistil, the female reproductive structure. The ovule is being shown right here, and you can see the egg, the polar nuclei there, the sperm pollen tube would come down and loop around and go right there, and sperm would swim down here and go in and do the fertilization. And then at that point, once fertilization happens, this ovule is going to become the seed. Okay? And this pistil or carpel is going to become the fruit. It's going to become that. Okay? Please note that fruit to us means an apple, but it might not be an apple. It might be a pea pod. That pod might be the fruit. So understand that fruit can mean different things. It's a thing that contains seeds fundamentally. So, the advantages of flowers and fruits. Flowers draw pollinators, which are efficient at transferring pollen. Pine trees, your car is covered in pine pollen right now. The wind blows the pollen everywhere. That pine pollen on your car is no hope of creating additional pine trees. It's done. But if you have this guy very specifically going from flower to flower, odds are much better that your pollen is going to end up where you want it. And the more specific your pollinator is designed just for you, the better off you are still. Okay, so flowers draw pollinators who are very, very efficient at pollinating, unlike wind. Fruit is very good at seed dispersal, and it might just be by the little wind and water, the helicopters of a maple, for example, that twirl and disperse the maple seed, yards away from its beginning point. Animals can also disperse using fruit, either because they get a burr stuck in their fur and rub it off miles down the road, or because they eat an apple and miles down the road poop out the apple seeds, and we've dispersed that apple far, far away from its parent. So either of these is much more precise than wind. Okay, angiosperms certainly can use wind. Oak trees are angiosperms, and they do rely on wind, but nonetheless, the structures that are present on most flowering plants do allow for more efficient or widespread dispersal. So this is just a little bit on that triploid tissue. Apparently it has the advantage I told you about, that endosperm won't be made. We won't waste the energy and make it if fertilization has not occurred. Also, apparently, it has this triploid tissue has a greater ability to pull stuff from the mother than the embryo does by itself. I don't know why. I was so puzzled by why the triploid, I looked it up, and this was the answer I got. So, at any rate, I don't think anyone will ask you. Again, the angiosperms have one division, one, Anthophyta. All flowering plants fall in this one group. There are 235,000 species. That is easily more than all other plant forms combined. Easily. There are two important classes of angiosperms, the monocots and the dicots. Okay? Let me see if oh, swell. Microsoft PowerPoint has stopped working. Okay. That makes me really, really sad. I will edit this together. I'm going to stop now and we will edit it in. See ya. Ooh, this is really long. Sorry about that. Okay. Picking up from where we left off. Alright. Monocots and dicots. We're going to talk a little bit more about these later. These are the two major classes of flowering plants, and we'll talk about their differences later. Hopefully this will be something that will ring a bell from first year biology. This is a diagram showing the life cycle. You'll notice it's much more complex than either of the ones that I've shown you so far, but I do want you to be able to see, the pistil here. This is the ovary. This, I need dope. Use white. Alright, this is the ovary that contains ovules. So ovary, the big thing here, which contains ovules, and remember each ovule has inside of it an egg. and 2 polar nuclei and a few other cells. These ovules contain the female gametophyte highly reduced. Okay, the anther is where right here, and that's producing the pollen grains that will contain the sperm. So pollen that contains sperm. Okay. Meiosis occurs in the anther that is going to create the pollen grain. Meiosis occurs in the ovule that will create something called a megaspore, but what you need to know is that's going to create the female gametophyte, which is going to ultimately create the egg. Okay, so meiosis leads to an egg, as it always does. We go through some convoluted steps. Here you see this structure that's up here. We're showing it to you down here. It's got the pollen grain on it, a pollen tube growing down, entering the ovule. Okay, the pollen tube, you can see the 2 sperm. They are going to enter the ovule, fertilize the egg, fertilize the polar nuclei. We're going to see endosperm and a zygote begin to grow, and importantly here we've got an embryo, a little baby plant that we can see. We've got a food supply, starch that we can see. If you open up a bean, you will find the baby plant, and you will see the reason you eat the bean is because it's got full of starch. When you eat a lima bean or whatever, a peanut, what you're eating is the starch that was set aside for the baby that was in that seed. You eat the baby, you eat its food, you're a bully, you're evil, okay? You're eating a baby and its food. How do you live with yourself, okay? And then the seed coat that's around it, okay? If some big bully like you doesn't eat it, then that seed, of course, will grow into a new sporophyte. All right. Oh God. All right. Well, we'll just have to. No, we can't end there. All right. So here's what I'm gonna do. No, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna do this. All right. We're going to jump this. This is what we need to make sure you understand. So, this is a wonderfully clear plant evolutionary ride that we are taking. All right. Actually, I don't want to use that color because that's okay. We've got some ancient common algae plant ancestor down here. Someone from this stem, this root here, gets the idea to have a cuticle and some gametangia, and that leads to the bryophytes, who still exist today. But someone from this group, pretty early on, got the idea to have vascular tissue and dominant sporophytes, and that led to the ferns. Well, someone from that group got the idea to have protected seeds and pollen, which led to the gymnosperms, the pines and everything. And someone from that group got the idea to have fruits and flowers, which led to the angiosperms, the flowering plants. This is about as linear a progression in evolution as you could ever hope to have. It is a pretty little picture, very clear. We get one advance, which leads to another, leads to another, leads to the other. So you should understand that little journey, okay? And that is where I will leave you with this. Sorry it was so long. Hope you stuck with it. Go out and look at some plants. They're really cool. I don't care if you think they aren't. They are. All right. I'll talk to you later. Have a good one.